Welcome to Steve's Place. Tonight we have a really good guest who's going to be introducing us to some of the ancient technologies and that. But before we get to that, I need to do some house cleaning here. This year we have our conference coming up August 6th to 10th at the Crown Plaza Hotel. And we have a really packed up list of people. You can find the program on testatech.info. We are mailing out within the next 2 weeks. We should be mailing out about 6,000 or 7,000 programs directly. And if you want some programs that you can mail to other people, give me a call and let me know. Anyway, August 6th to 10th, Crown Plaza Hotel. We have great rates. Just go to our website, testatech.info, to get some more information. Okay. And then the most important thing is YouTube. Right now we're trying to build up our YouTube audience or our membership. Starting here in the next week, I'll be uploading one video for members only. From last year, we have one every other week. So if you want to see last year's videos, that might be a good way. Or you can just sign up, for the whole conference from last year. It's $99, and there's a lot of stuff that's not going to be on YouTube. Like we have all the cutouts, between speakers. We had ad hoc interviews with different speakers and different vendors and that, and you won't find those anyplace else except on HowTube. So go to testatech.info and check out our website. And without further ado, I want to remind everyone we have the Psychotronics conference coming out July 17th to 20th in Chicago, Illinois, the Windy City, my home. Anyway, so if you get a chance, you might want to go check it out. HTTPS www.psychotronics.com, I believe. All right. Anyway, so without further ado, let me introduce Dan.
Hello, Steve.
There you are. Okay, and do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started, or?
Yeah, so thanks for inviting me on behalf of the USPA and the 50th anniversary conference coming up. Looking forward to that. So my background is I'm an electrical engineer with over 3 decades in the aerospace and defense world, but I have a passion for kind of some of the old power generation technologies as well as some of the newer ones. And also for a science I came across in my kind of research that is kind of the core of Vedic sciences, and it's called Sankhya. And so what I want to do today is introduce that topic to the audience, and that's what I'll be doing a deep dive in at the USPA conference in July. So we call it nature's wheelwork because I think that's a great term that Nikola Tesla came up with, and what Sankhya science is really the core of that. And it starts with some axiomatic definitions starting from 1 + 1 = 2, and then it derives all the particle states and beyond. And one thing, if you want to understand the motivation for me in doing this, there's a tiny URL there that talks about mankind working in harmony with nature. And it kind of goes back to the Declaration of Independence, where Jefferson wrote, the laws of nature and nature's God. So that's really kind of getting to the core of it. So, why are we here? The simple answer is that the current physics kind of ignores 2/3 of phenomena. And that if we could understand that, then we could actually take advantage of the substantial continuum of the space, what we call the ether, the substratum. And if you talk to Ben Rich at Lockheed Skunk Works, he would say that, and would agree with, it opens the doors to infinite freedom and unlimited exploration of the cosmic scene. So a lot to get excited about, and that's a pretty bold statement, but you'll see, hopefully, that there's a lot of basis for that. So the bottom line here up front is that the substratum is reality. It's the permanent base, the energetic, extremely powerful, we call the ground state, but it's actually very energetic. It's just balanced. And so it's 0 point in terms of not being energetic in matter, but it's the source and power. It's the plenum, the components that all manifestation is built on. And when you trigger it or you polarize it or you catalyze it, then we get what we call manifestation. So we're really going to dive down into what is the substratum, what is the ether. And if you look at Nikola Tesla, he talks about the medium, and he talks about you can derive every form of energy can be obtained with little to no effort, and it's inexhaustible store of power. And so he was kind of onto this, and he also understood what it could do for humanity in terms of advancing as a civilization. So that's really what we want to talk about. And here's some quotes from Ben Rich. And I think the point here is that we have, as a civilization, at least in the 20th century, tapped into this, and probably long before in prior civilizations. But Ben Rich says that anything you can imagine, we already know how to do. And it's time to end the secrecy and make the technology available for the private sector. And so Sankhya and the science and the disclosure of that science, due to some research by Gopalakrishnan Srinivasan in the last 40 years, is going to make that possible. So you can look at in the 1950s, this is an unclassified report from the 1956, declassified in 1990, but the subject is electrogravitics, and we're talking about advanced propulsion technologies. And so since the 50s, they've been looking for a science that can explain kind of nature's wheelwork. And so they have this list of items: the electric charge, the mass of electron or proton, Planck's constant, velocity of light, gravitational constant, or the cosmological constant. And they said if we could make progress on any one of these, then we would be able to advance electrogravitics. And the conclusion is that if there just was a single solution, a single equation, a simple science that kind of brought all the different forces together, then we could make great progress. And I think the bottom line here is that the science does exist, and it's actually existed for millennia. So why isn't it out there? And it has to do with mindset. And so, this is a quote from the person who decoded it, G. Srinivasan, over the last 40 years. And he says it's amazing and perturbing that there's been this singular perfect law that unifies all the natural processes. And it's been known for eons, yet neither science or the Vedic academia is any wiser for it. And if it actually exists, then there's serious ramifications for both theoretical physics and holistic science, as well as theistic ideologies. And that may be part of the reason, is that the dogma of the existing mindset doesn't allow for this answer to come through in modern times. And that's what we're trying to change. So on the note of opening minds, thinking naturally, Viktor Schauberger reminds us, comprehend and copy nature. And Sankhya is tied to nature directly. And basically what Viktor Schauberger is saying here is that if Newton focused not just on the apple falling, but how did the apple get up there in the first place, what the growth part of it, the creation part of it, then we'd have a much better understanding of how gravity actually works. And I think some of you know that Newton was an alchemist, and he probably thought more than just about the falling apple, but that's what we're told in our education. So thinking naturally is the key, and to frame this up in terms of energy and just magnitudes of nature's powerhouse. It's energy is everywhere, as Nikola Tesla stated, but everybody's probably familiar with the E equals mc squared. And one way to look at that is that for every unit of mass, you have to multiply it by 10 to the 16th power to come up with the equivalent energy. And so units of energy that we're familiar with are joules, or watt hours or electron volts. And so if you take 1 gram of matter and you go through this math here, it basically says that you could power 1 million households for a day in 1 gram of matter. So a sugar cube is 3 to 5 grams. So amazing power that's tied up into matter that's coherent. And so that's what we want to get down to is unfolding that and diving deep into where nature's powerhouse is, how does it work, and the 6.2410 to the 16th EV there, the 18th EV, that basically is, once you get into this, looks like 2 pi times c squared, and 1 over that equals what we call the electric charge. And so physics doesn't do a very good job of telling us where the electric charge comes from or what is a field, and Sankhya addresses that directly. So here's the science, and here's the book. So G. Srinivasan wrote this 2-volume set called Secret of Sankhya, the Acme of Scientific Unification. And that's a transliteration from an ancient text or older text by Krishna and the Sankhya Karika, which means verses, like in song. And so they had captured this in an oral context, this ancient math. And it's over 32,000 years old, and it's just been rediscovered in the last few decades. And it literally means the logic of counting. And so you start from 1 + 1 = 2, and you can derive, using combinatorial mathematics, all the phenomena in the universe. And so in these 2-volume sets, it lays all that out. So it's a brilliant discovery, or rediscovery, I should say, of an ancient wisdom. And so these are the real insights into nature's wheelwork. So what we want to do is kind of understand and think through what this is. And so the next part here will lay it out. And I want to remind everyone that, when we're thinking naturally, the science of Sankhya is the clarity of thought on that. So the quote from G is that Sankhya teaches man how to think. Nature has its own laws, and man has to learn them. So man has to learn how to think as nature has intended, for that is his real and innate strength. And what he's saying here is that man and his mind was built to plug into this nature's wheelwork. And so we can hitch not only our machines, but also our mind to nature's wheelwork. And so in Sanskrit, mankind means thinking being. So they were on the right track the whole time. We just were very slow to kind of catch up. So Sankhya, people are probably familiar with the Vedic, the Vedas, at least in name. And the Sankhya is the core science that underpins all the Vedas. And the Vedas are really a kind of a cookbook or a recipe applied science, let's say, for a natural process, a 4-step universal process for interaction that covers both the physical and the mental, and it covers it at any scale. And so if you look at if we take using a magnifying glass to ignite paper, for example, and we look at the 4 Vedas and the steps, how you would correlate those, that the first step, the Rig Veda, is collecting and organizing resources. So you have the sun's rays, you have a magnifying glass, and you have a piece of paper. And then the next step is the focusing and structuring. So you align the magnifying glass with the rays. And then the third one is the triggering or synchronization piece. And that's when you hold the glass in just the right angle for the focal length to hit the paper. So you're focusing all the energies into this tiny spot, millions of miles away, and it ignites the paper, and the collection of that is the fourth one. And this applies to physical process. And if you see on the right, the little blue, red, green, and white ellipses, it applies to the thinking process as well. That's the OODA loop. So observe, orient, decide, act. And so the Vedas are there to explain this process and put it to application. And then beyond the Vedas is the yogas, and the yogas is yoking the human body directly to nature's wheelwork. So they have this whole set of starting with the science of Sankhya, building up into the Vedas, that then apply to individuals and humans in the yogas. And it's not new. The Sankhya is probably new to a lot of people. The Vedas aren't, but the Vedas were very influential for centuries, and even going back all the way to Pythagoras, who said all is number. So, and his student Plato were both influenced, as well as Newton. And then they were natural philosophers. And then you get into the inventors, like the Nikola Teslas and the Viktor Schaubergers, and they talk about how the Vedas inspired them. And Schauberger talks about the Atlanteans and the flying machines, the Vimanas. And so he understood and was influenced by that as well. And then on the top row, you see the quantum physicists, Bohr and Schrodinger and Heisenberg, Einstein, Oppenheimer. They were all well-read, some more than others, but they all were familiar with the Vedas. And so there's a long history of the Vedic science. And what they didn't have was the clarity of thought and the decoding that G. Srinivasan has done in the last 40 years. So how do we skin this cat? We're going to move on now, and we're not going to do math, but we're going to show some math just to show how elegant it is. So we want to kind of get on the same page. So what's a logical, common sense starting point? So the first one is we're going to assume that nature's wheelwork is knowable. You know, it's not going to be a mystery. It's not going to be occluded. And to start, we only need to agree on four things in my mind. So the first is the logic of counting. 1 + 1 = 2. And that's introduces the first axiom. And so it's axiom means self-evident truth. So everybody should be able to agree that 1 + 1 = 2. The second is that real things are three-dimensional. You know, a 1D point or a 2D line, those are mathematical implements. They're not reality. Reality is 3D. And then when people talk about greater dimensions, 4, 5D, 11D degrees, you know, what they're really talking about is the dynamism and the combinatory modes of simultaneous and sequential interaction. So if we look at the substratum as this energy density, it's all the dynamics that you get into these higher dimensions, and you know, how does it store information, and how is information retrieved, those kinds of things. Space is space, and space is three-dimensional, and so real things are three-dimensional. So when we count real things, we're counting something that's three-dimensional. And then the third one is something never comes from no thing, and that should be self-evident. And the other way to look at that is nowhere is there no thing. That means that we're not talking about physics. We're talking about physics of fullness and not about emptiness. You know, we're talking about plenum physics, not particle physics. And when you talk about open and closed systems, it's all connected. And so all the physics and the interactions have to be balanced and described in that kind of environment. And then the last one is the dynamism. And I think everybody can accept, it's self-evident that nature is, you know, dynamic. You know, if we just look at galaxies, solar systems, you know, planets, atoms, all those things are spinning and moving all the time. And, you know, it exists. So dynamism is there. But the real trick is to understand the modalities of the dynamism. And that's where Sankhya does a 100% job of covering that. And so that's what we want to dive into next. So the mental model that we want to start with, this is, don't worry about reading the small text, is let's focus on the green cube up here. And that's really going to be our model of the universal holodeck. So people are familiar with pixels on a 2D screen. A voxel is just a 3D version of that. So picture all these cubes all in alignment so that all space is filled. That's basically what the substratum is, where each one of those little cubes is something that modern day we'd call 0-point energy, which means the energy at which the temperature is at the 0 point. But it means that the substratum is energetic. It doesn't mean zero energy. It means at the 0 point, it's energetic. And the Sankhya version of that is the perpetual harmonic oscillator. That is the powerhouse for all of nature. And it's important to understand that. So you have a substratum that's made up of all these little perpetual harmonic oscillators. It's perpetually dynamic. And then we look at two different extremes. One is the large. So the largest coherent unit would be the Purusha. That's a Sanskrit term. So that's kind of the ground state. We call that the singularity or black hole in modern physics. And then at the other opposite end, the reciprocal of that is the Mula Prakriti, where Mula means root and Prakriti means oscillatory coherent state. And so the smallest oscillating state is called the Mula Prakriti. That equates to the cosmological constant or the string, the infinitesimal in calculus, or the elemental quantum, where at the elemental level, length, time, charge, inertia, photon rest mass, they're all equal to 1 at that point. And so that's the framework. You have a substratum. It's built up of all these cubes. These cubes are perpetual harmonic oscillators, and you have different densities from the smallest, the Mula Prakriti, up to the largest, which is the Purusha. So that's our kind of context. So the nice thing about Sankhya, rather than using people's names like volt and amps and Webers and so on, it talks about literally it's an encoded language. And so Sankhya is a mnemonic for Sa 5 and Ka 2. And so Kapila Muni created this outstanding scientific theory of manifestation that covers all phenomena. And he did it a long time. We're talking about 32,000 years back. And at you see down at the bottom there's 3 columns. And on the left, you have the Swabhava, which is the Tama. That's the coherent piece. And so that's 5-2 or 52 orders. So 10 to the 52 orders at the maximum. In the middle, you have the Raja or the resonant. And that's kind of the unity. 1 + 1 = 2, the basic quantum doubling. And then on the right, you have the Svatva, which is the expansive. And that's 1 - 52. So that's 10 to the -51 powers. And that's the smallest. That's the Mula Prakriti. And so right off the bat, the name of the science tells you numerically what the max and min are. It kind of bounds the problem. And if you go into Sanskrit, there's 68 axioms or sutras that define the entire physics. The first one says that everything that we see and observe and detect wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the substratum, which has 4 characteristics. It's coherent, it's synchronized, it's perpetually dynamic, but it's unmanifest. And so that sets the stage. And so it's an important thing to grab onto when we're talking about the physics of a plenum and physics of fullness, is to understand what the substratum is, because everything else is just activity on top of that. So again, we don't want to do math, but we want to show how elegant the math is. So the substratum has these 4 qualities to it. And in the activities, there's you'll see this repeating pattern. They call this the trigunas, or the 3 stresses. And so you have the simultaneous activity, a sequential activity. So simultaneous means they're happening at the same time. Sequential is one thing happens, then the next thing happens. And the coherent means what's happening happens exactly at the same time, the same phase, and fully synchronized. But then there's 2 modes. There's a simultaneous mode on these rows here, and there's a sequential mode. And so if you think about polarizing the substratum as the neutral energetic background, the simultaneous piece would be the compression, call it the proton neutron, the massive things. And then the sequential would be, for example, the electron orbitals and the what we call charge. And so the brilliance of these 6 numbers here is that when you take the ratio of the simultaneous compression over the sequential expansion, you get 1. And these are irrational numbers. And so, they're repeating decimals. And so it's quite amazing, at least it is to me, that's the case. And not only that, the difference between these 2 pairs of terms, which go back to the 5 and the 2, you have both equal the ratio of 5 to 7. And so that's 5 over 5 plus 2. And if you look at the number there, that repeating number, that's 5 sevens. Over to the right, you have 5 plus 2 equals 7. So 1 over 7, 2 over 7, 3 over 7 is the repeating patterns. And if you're familiar with vortex-based mathematics, you'll notice that those patterns there are missing the 3, 6, and 9. And so vortex-based mathematics will find a home here in Sankhya. The other one at the top above that, the 5 times 2, equals 10. And 10 is the reason we use decimal numbering system is that a cycle is defined as 10 counts. And we'll go over that a little bit more, but it has this unique property where the 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, and so on. So you can see right off the bat that the numbering and the insights are crazy, brilliant, and whoever figured this out. And each of these, you could go into more detail if you had more time, but just the fact that those ratios exist and they equal to 1 and the difference equals to 0 is pretty amazing. So we have the substratum here, the green substratum up here, the big cube, and it's a bunch of these little cubes all adjacent to each other. And each little mini adjacent cube is the same as the one next to it. So what is the universal interaction? And this is where you bring in the golden ratio. The universal interaction is this combination of a compression, a collision, followed by rebounding or shuttling, and then an expansion. And if you've looked at the Newton's cradle, you can kind of see what that is. You drop the ball, it collides, and then the one at the other end will separate and then come back and repeat that. So that is the basic interaction, where we talk about the compression as a simultaneous change ratio. And when you talk about things that happen at the same time, you're talking about a ratio, 1 over something. And it's relative to some unit, 1 over x. And then the sequential means something happens plus then something else. So that's the 1 plus x. In music, harmony would be the 1 over x, and the melody would be the 1 plus x. And this is where it's very important to understand. And the only number that x can be is the golden mean ratio. And this is where self-similar comes in. And this is where the physics of plenum comes in, is that if something happens over here, you need an equal opposite to happen over there. Because remember, all these are connected all the time. And there's 6 faces of a cube. So those are a lot of interactions that all have to balance. So self-similar means that everything that happens comes from within. And so the next line there where it says 1 equals x plus x squared, what this is saying is that you have an expansion piece plus a compression piece that equals the whole. And the fact that you can take it to the nth power means that you could dive down to any scale level that you want, or up to any scale level you want. Your 1 can be the universe. Your 1 could be a galaxy. Your 1 could be an atom or an orange. But then you can divide that down using the same ratio. And so the blue here is the midpoint, half, plus some number. And the compression, the red, is a half minus that same number, where that same number is this third order damping factor divided by 2. And that's a very key interval. And so you have this happening where you have a expansion followed by a compression and a shuttling in between, where the 2 green midpoints, the x cubed over 2, those 2 parts together equal your x cubed. And so this is the kind of interaction, linear interaction, that happens on every face of every cube. And it's the same interaction, and it can happen at any scale level. And that's pretty profound when you think about it. But this x cubed over 2, which is an interval, will be important when we want to understand the speed of light. So the next thing is gravity. So gravity really is the only force. All the other ones are derivative forces. And what that means is that you have this energetic sea of energy that's in these little cubes all arranged. And what we're talking about is energy density at any one of those cubes. And when those cubes operate at the same rate in phase, then there's a collapse function. And so they turn into, if you look on the left, you can see the interactions around the circle. There's two little circles on each arrow that are colliding together. But when those things happen at the same time, you move over to the right and you get one larger magnitude interaction around a surface that's now a radius from the center. And what happens is that you have a collapse where c cubed, or your rate cubed, goes into single rate. So if you had 10 people clapping independently, you would be able to count 10 claps. But if they all clap at the same time, it sounds like one clap, but it's a very loud clap. And that's kind of the basic idea behind gravity. And so the gravity in Sankhya means, and we look at the bottom equation there, is density times time squared. And so as you collapse two of the three directions into a single count of c, you go from c cubed to c, then you lose the t squared there. So that's why E equals mc squared, is that's what's hidden in the mass. And the Sankhya g is 1 over Newton, but that is a universal constant. And so that's how, if the ancients knew the orbital radius, the orbital periods, because they knew that there's only one solution to that, where that planet moving around, rotating on its axis, and then moving through space around its orbit, that kinetic energy, those angular momentums, have to equal the C in the background, the substratum. And so it falls out. So you can predict planetary movements. You get Kepler's law, for example. So when you collapse something, this is when you get into circular movement and cycles of interaction. And so as you get the collapse in the center and the massive thing draws in, the outer ones, there's the same number of counts in the middle. Let's say the 10 counts, for example, all happening at the same time in the middle, in place. They're not moving. So what has to happen on the edge is it has to start rotating to have the equivalent kinetic energy, or sequential rotational energy. And that's what causes rotation. And that rotation, if it follows the self-similar ratio, which is our golden ratio, then there's 10 of those around the circle. 2 pi over 10 equals 36 degrees. And so this is why we count in decimal terms, is because of this property right here. And it's tied to the golden mean. And so this is where you start getting cyclic interactions. So we have the linear interactions. We have the gravity, which is the true force, which just means it's just a gradient. You have more of something here and less of something over here. And so there's going to be a movement. And then that movement, when it is about a point that there's a center of action, then you start getting rotation. You start getting vortices. So that's a little bit to get through, but that is those interactions have to happen at any scale. And so there's only one law of interaction. That's the good news once you learned it. And it's applied at any scale. And so if we go back to our Sankhya 5 and 2, at the large level, we have the mass of the universe at 10 to the plus 52. And then we have a mula prakriti, which is the smallest quanta, and that's 10 to the minus 51. And so to break that down, if we look in the center here, we look at the substratum. It's a balanced energetic substratum where the compressive potential equals the expansive potential. And there's 6 orders of C. And C is our cyclic cycle of 10 to 2 over x to the cubed. And if you remember, this here, x3 over 2, x cubed over 2 is an interval. 1 over that is a rate. 1 over an interval is a rate. And so that is what the substratum here in all 6 directions is humming along at. So if you take the largest kx, the Purusha, over half of that C3, that equals the smallest thing times C3. And so that's the balance. You've got the big and the small all balancing in here. And what the takeaway from this is that you need to think in orders of c to the second, c to the fourth, c to the sixth. And so you start down here and you're at 1 over c to the sixth. You're at the smallest thing there is. And then up here, you're over here in the mu, the mass of the universe, you're talking about c to the sixth powers greater than that. So, and everything in between. So you have your Planck length, LP over here is c squared times the smallest length. You have, which is on the same order as your h or your Planck's constant. And that's basically 2 pi squared times your LP. So it's just a function of the fact that you now have this circular movement around the square. And that the kx is your Purusha over here. And then you can kind of go up on the left side here, starting at the lower left. You basically have acceleration at the nuclear level equals to 1/10 over the electric charge. And electric charge is simply 2 pi times 10 to the second to the third to the third. And so right here, you can see that you have 2 cycles of 10 interacting, and then you have 3 axes, up, down, left, right, and then, front, back. And then that cube is interacting with all the other ones, and that's where the third cube comes from. And that's, basically what the electric charge, or 1 over the electric charge is. When we talk about electron volt, that's really what we're talking about there. And so there's this natural progression and ladder of energies that all happen throughout the substratum. So we'll talk about the speed of light again. And so, current physics says that we have this empirical standard and it's tied to the cesium atom and it's so many meters per second. And so what's a meter and what's a second? So there's a lot of things that need to be defined there that we just kind of call out. So modern physics starts in the middle and then moves its way up and down and fills in the blanks when it can. Sankhya starts at 1 + 1 = 2, the very lowest, and it gets the interactions right there, and then everything else scales. So Sankhya says that the speed of light is this term 10 to the power of 2 over x cubed plus another term that's a function of the distance away from the source. So the radius of the sun to the radius of the earth, power of 10. And so there's 2 parts, which this says that speed of light is not constant. So what that looks like is that you have the baseline C along here as the energy level of the substratum, but at the sun's surface, you have an expansion. You have C times 10 to the 1, and then it decays as a function of distance from the radius of the sun. So at Earth, it would be something higher than C, but something less than what it came off on the sun. And what a photon is a lot like this annular waveform here, or this coherent bubble that these 2 dolphins are making. And it looks like that. That's a coherent shape that travels through space, but it loses energy as it goes through the medium very slowly, but it does. And so if you looked at all the planets, you would see that on Earth, here's our speed of light on Earth, and that if you get closer to the sun here at Mercury and Venus, then it's faster than the speed that we measure. And if you go out to Mars farther away, it'd be slower. And so if you compare the speed of light to Earth, then it looks like it's getting slower the farther away and faster. But all of it, if you compare it to the background, the substratum, it's all greater than the substratum. It's all greater than 1. So what does that mean? What would be a conclusion from this? So if you're standing right in the middle between 2 light sources, 2 stars, they both are going to slow down at the same time by the time the light gets to you. And so it looks like they're the same speed. If you get closer to one, you're near this one, you get a blue shift. It looks faster than the one that's from farther away because it had longer time to degrade and slow down. So if you assume light is constant speed, you might think that the universe is expanding. But if you really understand that light slows down, then space is space. It's not expanding, and that the light is slowing down. And so the Big Bang theory goes away. So those are pretty big ramifications that science needs to kind of address. Let's see, how are we doing on time? So that's the speed of light in the substratum. We talked about the substratum. We talked about the speed of light. The next thing we want to talk about is particles of different sizes, starting with, a hydrogen atom, for example. And so that's what this diagram is trying to get across, is you have our substratum. It has these 4 properties: coherent, perpetual, dynamic, but unmanifest. It's oscillating in 3 dimensions at the speed of light. That's kind of the carrier frequency of the substratum. And what's interesting is that if you polarize the background, and this applies at any scale, we're just showing one atom here, for example, you have the red, which is the kind of the hadronic, or the nucleon, the proton neutron piece. You have the green, which is in the middle, and that's the same energetic level as the substratum. And then you have the blue, the leptonic, would be the orbital axis, the orbital electrons, for example, with 7 layers there beyond it. And so what you're seeing there is a polarization of space. But what's very interesting is that if you look at this right here, the acceleration, the ratio of the Planck mass over to the nucleon mass, or the gyromagnetic ratio times c squared, or a charge, which is an electronic charge, are all the same value. What's different is how coherent they are, the shape they take. At the middle of this red cube is the Planck mass, right here, that little red square among those 4 blue ones. But then you have this boundary, the red boundary, which is your PM. And now you're talking about this kind of energetic level, and the energetic level all equal to 2 pi 10 over 10 to the 18th. And then you have the leptons. And the difference is that it's static or coherent like ice in the middle, and it's breathing around this green up and down using the gyromagnetic moment. And then at the blue lepton, you have things that are swirling more. So the total energy is the same. It's just what form that dynamic energy takes. And so over here, you can see that in the center is the quanta, the mula prakriti. And then if you go to 1 times c to the first power, you get Planck time constant type level, 10 to the minus 4, 44th. If you do c squared, you get the neutrino, you get the nucleon. If it's c cubed, you get the static elasticity of space at c to the 4th. You get the Planck mass at c to the 5th, and you get the Purusha at c to the 6th. So everything is a function of this atomic unit, this quanta, mula prakriti, and it's just various orders of multiplying by c to get the energy, but to get the density level. But you can see in just one hydrogen atom, you have all those things happening all about that point. And so this is just different energetic waveforms and patterns that are happening in the simultaneous and sequential modes to create what we call manifestation. So this is just another look at it, where you have at the core, you have the Planck mass, you have the neutron proton boundary, you have the green, which is the neutral, and in between the green and the first blue and the green and the red is your breathing mode. That's your c squared times GMR mode. And then between the 2 blue rings, and there's 7 of them, you have your electrons. And the density at the green is equal to 1. The radius, volume, density are all 1. And as you go out to the outer layers of the blue, you get twice the radius, and the volume is 8, or an octave higher. And then the opposite is true as you go towards the middle, down from the green into the red. And so you have a oscillating breathing mode from red to green, and then you have one from blue to green, which is your sequential mode. And so everything, whether it's an atom or a galaxy, follows the same pattern. And we talk about spectrums. We have pH levels, and we have, you know, the Roy G. Biv light, and it's all because of these 7 spectrums going from one octave to the next. There's 7 levels of change, and those are standard levels no matter what scale you're talking about. So the bottom line is, what is mass and charge? And so the definition, when you get to Sankhya and you kind of noodle on this a while, is that if you can compress it, it's a charge. If it's rigid continuum, then it's a mass. And so inside the red, we call that mass, and the equivalent energy, you have to multiply it by c squared. E equals mc squared. And outside of that, where you can compress it, then you're talking about rotational kinetic energy that makes up the difference. But that energy that we see and measure is only the blue. We really can't see the red or the green, but we can measure its effect, and we call that gravity and mass and force. And the gyromagnetic ratio here, GM, is just 7 plus 1 over 7. And so that number 3.57 is a key number when it comes to balancing, because if you look here, this is the neutron minus the PM state, or the PM state minus the proton, and that ratio is your gyromagnetic ratio over 2, and it's the same for your electron version of that, the blue, except it's at a radius out of this radius here is 1 over k, and k is just the cube root of 2. So this is what balances the perpetual nature of an atom or a galaxy. So just to kind of put a point on it here, you see this ladder. So Sankhya talks about counts. So it's counts per cycle. 1 equals a mula prakriti. So that's 1. And everything else is just orders up to c to the 6th power higher than that, all the way up to the Purusha. And in between, you have your neutrinos. You have your 7 times neutrino, which is a photon. You have your electrons. You have your protons, your Planck mass, all the way up. And so fractions of a count, which means the inverse of the counts. So counts count up from 1. If you take 1 example of an electron, 9.1 to the minus 31, that's a kilo. We call that a kilogram. So there's a 1-to-1 correlation. And to go from kilograms over to giga electron volts, you use this equation up here, which is c squared over the electric charge, which is another 2 orders of electric charge. So that's c to the 4th power to go from kilograms to energy. And then this is where it talks about the substrate and being so energetic. On the first page, we talked about as 10 to the 25th giga electron volts. This is where that number comes from. So you can go through all the particles, you know, from quarks on up, and your fermions and bosons, and they all map to these properties. And that right here, in the middle, you can see the green box. You can see that the derived values of your protons and neutrons, electrons, and the physics measured ones are very accurate. And usually when there's a difference, it's because of how you measured it. And so what's brilliant, and what I think should blow most physicists' mind, is that you can derive all the particles' masses from 3 sets. If you look at the compression component, the rebounding component, and the expansion component, where in these brackets of 3, it maps to the compression, the brackets of 2 map to the rebounding, and the single brackets map to the expansion. And so you can see these are very simple numbers, and they have to do with things like 2 to the 3rd, which is 8. Or your cycle of 10 squared, you know, or your 2 to the 3rd minus 1, your spectrum equals 7, or your speed of light, 10 to the 2 over x cubed power, for example. And that maps to, in this case, the Purusha value for the first one, and then or the Planck mass on the second one. But we can go on down, we can talk about the protons and the neutrons, and keep following on till we get to the lepton class and the electron class, all the way down to the light, which is 7 neutrinos, a neutrino, a single neutrino, or the Mula Prakriti itself. And so you can see that all the math holds up, and that it's brilliant, and that, you know, it is the answer. And so even if you don't understand how we got here, it's a great place to hang your hat and say, okay, I need to understand this. This is where we're going. This does explain nature and nature's wheelwork. And so we look at this, and we look at spherical harmonic oscillators, and we get what you're probably familiar with these as orbitals of different mass properties. As you start combining, going from hydrogen to higher orders of matter, you just combine these all the way up to the whole universe and the cosmic microwave background temperature. It's all based on the spherical harmonics. And so you're really going from this red little dot, which is the Mula Prakriti, to something that's these squares, which is on the order of Planck scale, to the nuclear atom, all the way up to the stellar. It's all the same math. And this is a little table that kind of goes through that explains it. So your mass, your radius, your accelerations, velocities, densities, and time scales are all follow the same pattern, same laws of interaction. So this is to the end now. I think we're in good shape. And so what I'm be presenting, I have an hour presentation in the USPA conference, followed by a 2-hour breakout session. So here are some of the things that you can go further with. We can talk about how do you update the units, dimensional units that physics uses to cover all of what is the first cause, gravity, what is a perpetual harmonic oscillator, what is dark energy, dark matter, what is black body radiation. All those are derivable from first principles. What is magnetism? Why does the iron atom in its 55 weight, have certain properties? What is the impedance, permeability of free space? Those are all derivable from these first principles. And beyond that, when we're going back to the kind of the Ben Rich Lockheed Skunk Works, in 2017, Salvatore Pais put out a number of patents on basically a flying machine that had its own nuclear reactor in it. And it was vetted by the Navy. He was at Naval Warfare Center. And so the Navy supported it. The technical director said it was operable, but physicists dismissed it because he couldn't really explain it. It was new. He called it the superforce. Well, the superforce, Sankhya explains that it's just basically c to the 4th power, but that's all derivable. And he's really talking about the substratum. That is where all the infinite energy comes from. And so all those patents now can be explained. And so that should be a boost for people who are trying to go down those lanes. Planetary orbital dynamics, all those laws are completely derivable. And there's a bunch of inventions after that. So those are the kinds of things that we can cover in those 2 hours on the meeting. So I think that wraps it up, and that kind of gives you an overview to this topic and the kind of the brilliance of this Sankhya science.
I want to remind everyone, USPA Golden Anniversary Conference, July 17th to 20th, 2025. And on the description, I have, if you're on YouTube, in the description of the talk, there's a link there you can follow and can take you right there to the Secretariat's people. And are there any other questions? If you look over to the right, we have some questions here.
Where would that be? Oh, I see.
Yeah. So, crosstalk there. So, oh, your July 17th is 40th birthday. Yeah, well, wish I could see 40 again. But anyway, it looks like you had a great presentation. I don't think one has a lot of questions.
No, don't see any really, but
And,
It's a lot. It's something to watch afterwards and to spend some time at. It's really just trying to point you to a source of science that explains a lot that has been known for millennia, but is been suppressed for one reason or another.
And I want to remind everyone to give us a thumbs up there, in the YouTube thing, so other people can be notified about this and what a great talk it was. And are you coming to the a Tesla Tech one, or have you decided yet?
I'm not attending that one right now. Yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe next year if we don't get there this year.
Yeah.
But we do have a live stream. And that's the other thing. Both of these conferences, the USPA and the Tesla Tech, are going to have live streams. Okay. I think that Sectronics live stream will go on sale probably within a week or two, it looks like. And as soon as I know, we'll be letting you know that too.
And the 2-hour deep dive I'm talking about will be recorded and live streamed. So if you can't make it there in person, then you'll be able to see it.
Well, I'm going to try and make it, but I just, I don't know, this real ID just throws a curve into some things,
Right. Yeah, I know it's a pain.
And I might have to drive. And although I got a great deal on a van last week because I had to go pick up those programs, I was able to pick up a van for $53 a day. And that was a Pacific car. So that's a great deal from Enterprise. So try them out. I use hotwire.com for rentals. So you might want to try that out. And if I go to Chicago, I might end up going to Cincinnati the next week. You have the MUFOD conference. So
really, oh
yeah, that's being Cincinnati. So anyway,
okay.
Thank you all, and I'll see you all next week. And you all have a great one. And thank you for being present and being a great audience. And
thanks again, Steve.
Yeah, and don't forget to tell people about us. We're the best kept secret of science. So, okay.
Roger that.